In the 19th century, manifest destiny was a widely held belief in the United States that its settlers were destined to expand across North America. Historians broadly agree that there are three basic themes to manifest destiny: the special virtues of the American people and their institutions, the mission of the United States to redeem and remake the West in the image of agrarian America, and irresistible destiny to accomplish this essential duty. Historian Frederick Merck says this concept was born out of a sense of mission to redeem the old world by high example, generated by the potentialities of a new earth for building a new heaven. Historians have emphasized that manifest destiny was a contested concept. Pre-Civil War Democrats endorsed the idea, but many prominent Americans rejected it. Historian Daniel Walker Howe writes, "American imperialism did not represent an American consensus. It provoked bitter dissent within the national polity." Whigs saw America's moral mission as one of democratic example rather than one of conquest. Newspaper editor John O'Sullivan coined the term manifest destiny in 1845 to describe the essence of this mindset, which was a rhetorical tone. It was used by Democrats in the 1840s to justify the war with Mexico, and it was also used to divide half of Oregon with the United Kingdom. But manifest destiny always limped along because of its internal limitations and the issue of slavery, says Merck. It never became a national priority. By 1843, John Quincy Adams, originally a major supporter of the concept underlying manifest destiny, had changed his mind and repudiated expansionism because it meant the expansion of slavery in Texas. Merck concludes, "For the outset manifest destiny, vast in program, in its sense of continentalism, was slight in support. It lacked national, sectional, or party following commensurate with its magnitude. The reason was it did not reflect the national spirit." The thesis that it embodied nationalism, found in much historical writing, is backed by little real supporting evidence. Context: there was never a set of principles defining manifest destiny. Therefore it was always a general idea rather than a specific policy made with a motto, ill-defined but keenly felt. Manifest destiny was an expression of conviction in the morality and value of expansionism that complemented other popular ideas of the era, including American exceptionalism and romantic nationalism. Andrew Jackson, who spoke of extending the area of freedom, typified the conflation of America's potential greatness, the nation's budding sense of romantic self-identity, and its expansion. Yet Jackson would not be the only president to elaborate on the principles underlying manifest destiny. Owing in part to the lack of a definitive narrative outlining its rationale, proponents offered divergent or seemingly conflicting viewpoints. While many writers focus primarily upon American expansionism, be it into Mexico or across the Pacific, others saw the term as a call to example, without an agreed-upon interpretation, much less an elaborated political philosophy. These conflicting views of America's destiny were never resolved. This variety of possible meanings was summed up by Ernest Lee Tuvison, who writes, "A vast complex of ideas, policies, and actions is comprehended under the phrase manifest destiny. They are not, as we should expect, all compatible, nor do they come from any one source." Journalist John L. O'Sullivan, an influential advocate for Jacksonian democracy and a complex character described by Julian Hawthorne as always full of grand and world-embracing schemes, wrote an article in 1839, which, while not using the term manifest destiny, did predict a divine destiny for the United States based upon values such as equality, rights of conscience, and personal enfranchisement to a establish on earth the moral dignity and salvation of man. This destiny was not explicitly territorial, but O'Sullivan predicted that the United States would be one of a union of many republics sharing those values. 6 years later, in 1845, O'Sullivan wrote another essay titled Annexation in the Democratic Review, in which he first used the phrase manifest destiny. In this article he urged the U.S. to annex the Republic of Texas, not only because Texas desired this, but because it was our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Overcoming Whig opposition, Democrats annexed Texas in 1845. O'Sullivan's first usage of the phrase manifest destiny attracted little attention. O'Sullivan's second use of the phrase became extremely influential. On December 27, 1845, in his newspaper The New York Morning News, O'Sullivan addressed the ongoing boundary dispute with Britain. O'Sullivan argued that the United States had the right to claim the whole of Oregon, and that claim is by the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us. That is, O'Sullivan believed that Providence had given the United States a mission to spread republican democracy, because Britain would not spread democracy. Thought O'Sullivan, British claims to the territory should be overruled. O'Sullivan believed that manifest destiny was a moral ideal that superseded other considerations. O'Sullivan's original conception of manifest destiny was not a call for territorial expansion by force. He believed that the expansion of the United States would happen without the direction of the U.S. government or the involvement of the military. After Americans emigrated to new regions, they would set up new democratic governments, and then seek admission to the United States, as Texas had done. In 1845, O'Sullivan predicted that California would follow this pattern next, and that Canada would eventually request annexation as well. He disapproved of the Mexican-American War in 1846, although he came to believe that the outcome would be beneficial to both countries. Ironically, O'Sullivan's term became popular only after it was criticized by Whig opponents of the Polk administration. Whigs denounced manifest destiny, arguing that the designers and supporters of schemes of conquest, to be carried on by this government, are engaged in treason to our Constitution and Declaration of Rights, giving aid and comfort to the enemies of republicanism, in that they are advocating and preaching the doctrine of the right of conquest. On January 3, 1846, Representative Robert Winthrop ridiculed the concept in Congress, saying, "I suppose the right of a manifest destiny to spread will not be admitted to exist in any nation except the universal Yankee nation." Winthrop was the first in a long line of critics who suggested that advocates of manifest destiny were citing divine providence for justification of actions that were motivated by chauvinism and self-interest. Despite this criticism, expansionists embraced the phrase, which caught on so quickly that its origin was soon forgotten. Themes and influences. Historian William E. Weeks has noted that three key themes were usually touched upon by advocates of manifest destiny: the virtue of the American people and their institutions, the mission to spread these institutions, thereby redeeming and remaking the world in the image of the United States, the destiny under God to do this work. The origin of the first theme, later known as American exceptionalism, was often traced to America's Puritan heritage, particularly John Winthrop's famous "City Upon a Hill" sermon of 1630, in which he called for the establishment of a virtuous community that would be a shining example to the Old World. In his influential 1776 pamphlet Common Sense, Thomas Paine echoed this notion, arguing that the American Revolution provided an opportunity to create a new, better society. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand. Many Americans agreed with Paine, and came to believe that the United States' virtue was a result of its special experiment in freedom and democracy. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to James Monroe, wrote, "It is impossible not to look forward to distant times when our rapid multiplication will expand itself beyond those limits, and cover the whole northern, if not the southern continent." To Americans in the decades that followed, the proclaimed freedom for mankind, embodied in the Declaration of Independence, could only be described as the inauguration of a new time scale, because the world would look back and define history as events that took place before and after the Declaration of Independence. It followed that Americans owed to the world an obligation to expand and preserve these beliefs. The second theme's origination is less precise. A popular expression of America's mission was elaborated by President Abraham Lincoln's description in his December 1, 1862, message to Congress. He described the United States as the last best hope of Earth. The mission of the United States was further elaborated during Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, in which he interpreted the Civil War as a struggle to determine if any nation with democratic ideals could survive. This has been called by historian Robert Johanson the most enduring statement of America's manifest destiny and mission. The third theme can be viewed as a natural outgrowth of the belief that God had a direct influence in the foundation and further actions of the United States. Clinton Rossiter, a scholar, described this view as summing that God, at the proper stage in the march of history, called forth certain hardy souls from the old and privilege-ridden nations, and that in bestowing his grace he also bestowed a peculiar responsibility. Americans presupposed that they were not only divinely elected to maintain the North American continent, but also to spread abroad the fundamental principles stated in the Bill of Rights. In many cases this meant neighboring colonial holdings and countries were seen as obstacles rather than the destiny God had provided the United States. Farragher's analysis of the political polarization between the Democratic Party and the Whig Party is that most Democrats were wholehearted supporters of expansion, whereas many Whigs were opposed. Whigs welcomed most of the changes wrought by industrialization but advocated strong government policies that would guide growth and development within the country's existing boundaries. They feared that expansion raised a contentious issue, the extension of slavery to the territories. On the other hand, many Democrats feared industrialization the Whigs welcomed. For many Democrats, the answer to the nation's social ills was to continue to follow Thomas Jefferson's vision of establishing agriculture in the new territories in order to counterbalance industrialization. Another possible influence is racial predominance, namely the idea that the American Anglo-Saxon race was separate, innately superior, and destined to bring good government, commercial prosperity, and Christianity to the American continents and the world. This view also held that inferior races were doomed to subordinate status or extinction. Quote, "This was used to justify the enslavement of the blacks and the expulsion and possible extermination of the Indians." Alternative interpretations. With the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which doubled the size of the United States, Thomas Jefferson set the stage for the continental expansion of the United States. Many began to see this as the beginning of a new providential mission. If the United States was successful as a shining city upon a hill, people in other countries would seek to establish their own democratic republics. However, However, not all Americans of the political leaders believed that the United States was a divinely favored nation, or thought that it ought to expand. For example, many Whigs opposed territorial expansion based on the Democratic claim that the United States was destined to serve as a virtuous example to the rest of the world, and also had a divine obligation to spread its superordinate political system and a way of life throughout North American continent. Many in the Whig Party were fearful of spreading out too widely, and they adhered to the concentration of national authority in a limited area. In July 1848, Alexander Stephens denounced President Polk's expansionist interpretation of America's future as mendacious. In the mid-19th century, expansionism, especially southward toward Cuba, also faced opposition from those Americans who were trying to abolish slavery, as more territory was added to the United States in the following decades. Extending the area of freedom in the minds of Southerners also meant extending the institution of slavery. That is why slavery became one of the central issues in the continental expansion of the United States before the Civil War. Before and during the Civil War, both sides claimed that America's destiny were rightfully their own. Lincoln opposed anti-immigrant nativism and the imperialism of Manifest Destiny as both unjust and unreasonable. He objected to the Mexican War and believed each of these disordered forms of patriotism threatened the inseparable moral and fraternal bonds of liberty and union that he sought to perpetuate through patriotic love of country guided by wisdom and critical self-awareness. Lincoln's eulogy to Henry Clay, June 6, 1852, provides the most cogent expression of his reflective patriotism.